How are you? Are we live? I don't know if we're live right now, but how are you?
I normally record my videos, so I'll cut into whenever the discussion gets started, basically. But yeah,
Okay, cool.
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
All right, sweet. Then yeah,
So
let's.
I, I go by
If you
Mr.
don't mind,
Kai.
I'll just
But yeah, if you want to talk to me, refer to me. You can just call me Kai or whatever. Uh,
Kai. Okay, I'm Quibbles. Jonah, I don't give a
Quibbles.
shit. Yeah, call me Quibbles, I guess. Um. All right,
Yeah.
if you don't mind, if we do this while I'm walking, then let's do that.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm cool with that.
All right, sweet. Give me like 15 seconds to walk down my stairs. It's gonna be clattering with my water bottle. All that crap. Then let's start. Oh, sorry, Bobby. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. All right, I'm ready whenever.
Cool. So yeah, basically, I found out about you from watching. Well, I normally follow Fabian Liberty, so I saw you on one of his debates, and then I saw that you had other debates with other people. But
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of how I found you.
Sure.
But I don't know much about your opinions. I just know that you're for some amount of state. If I had to guess, probably some sort of mixed economy. But I will go ahead and let you just fill me in on your position. Tell me what kind of economic system you believe in. If you're cool with talking about economic systems, political systems.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So are you asking me, like, hey, you're president tomorrow, do what you want? Or are you asking me, like, if you could design your whole perfect system as ideally it would exist,
Yeah,
starting
yeah.
from
So,
scratch?
like, what kind of what would your ideal, I guess, economic or political system be?
My ideal system would be more Georgist than Georgism.
All right, go on.
So my ideal system, um, in my ideal system, there would be no taxes, but instead what you'd have is you'd have exclusively resource rent based payment for the to the government, by which all your services would be paid for. So already we have an understanding of stuff like pollution, right? You have to pay if you pollute the rivers, for example. But I would want to extend that much further. We already have an idea of a property tax. I much prefer land value taxes. But ultimately, my perfect system would be that all of the land is owned by the government. You'd have two options of how to pay. One option would be that you pay just sort of conventionally as people pay rent currently to landlords. But instead, the second option would also be what I would call infrastructural rent. So infrastructural rent would be that you pay people, or sorry, pay the government rather, um, by building up infrastructure. And so the value of that infrastructure would be counted towards your future rent payments. Um, and so if you, for example, build a house, now for a period of time based on the value of that house, in comparison to the value of the land that it's built on, you wouldn't owe any rent on that plot of land. And then once that time comes to an end, now the government owns a much nicer plot of land because this plot of land has this infrastructural improvement on it. And so the next person who rents from it is going to be willing to pay more because it has this infrastructural improvement, which puts us in a better position in terms of building the economy long term by building up the infrastructural support for it. So that would be in terms of land, but I would also extend this to, like, I support things like a carbon dividend. I support things like pollution being something you have to pay for, those sorts of things. But then I oppose other kinds of taxations that people are generally sort of supportive of in the sort of progressive movement. So, like, I definitely oppose anything that's a tax on labor, particularly. I oppose taxes on your labor previously done, which is my understanding of what capital is, as well. But I oppose particularly taxes on labor. So that's sort of my basic overarching thought process.
Okay. So, I mean, like, you do believe in taxes, but your taxes just take a different form,
So
or
I wouldn't call them
or the people
taxes.
rent from the government. Is that what you're
Yes, I
saying?
wouldn't call them taxes because I see there as being a difference between a tax, which I understand to be something that is taken from you just by virtue of like you exist and there's no real
Right.
reason for it, versus make a payment for service. So like even people who are very intensely anarchistic generally are in support of like, okay, well, we have this water system, right, in these cities, and this water system is owned by the government. And so this idea of you have to pay for water to come to your house doesn't seem that different to me than like you have to pay your utility bill for your gasoline, in my particular case, like People's Gas or whatever it is, right? This idea of like these people, whether they happen to be a governmental system or they happen to be a corporate system, in both cases, there's something that you have very little choice about who's going to offer you water and who's going to offer you gas, because that is the utility that's set up for your house. And in either case, they're providing you a service. So I don't think it's fair to call like your gas bill a tax, really. My point is simply that I think that it's better when the people who control the gas or the people who control the water are elected. Because in both cases, they're inherently monopolistic, right?
Okay. Do you believe in any type of private property under the system or none?
Yeah, everything that isn't a natural resource, I think should be able to be privately owned.
I mean, everything is a natural resource. So can you be more clear about
Sure.
that?
Yeah. So like, I think that if it is direct, if it is something that you cannot exclude, like I think that the broad point that I would say is like the part of the thing that is the result of labor, I'm totally game with that being privately owned, and the part of the thing that is not labor, I want as a general principle to be publicly owned, right? I want it to be owned by the people because I don't think anyone worked to create the natural resources. Now, obviously, if you get practical about it, you can't do that, right? You have to figure out a way that certain things, even if they're natural resources, have to be something that has to be owned, right? So, like, you can own because land is something that, like, you can own crops, right? But I don't think you can own the land that the crops are being built on in the same way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so interesting. So do you believe in personal property, like consumable
Yeah,
goods, like people can still
for sure.
consume things?
Yep.
Okay, but you
I think
just
that, like, so for example, so I do think that like the way that you deal with something like gas, for example, right, is going to be different than the way that you deal with water. So in the case of gas, like there is this certain amount of gas that exists out there, right? And like there is only that much, and we're not going to be able to renew it. We're not going to be able to fix it. And also, like that's fine. I think it's okay to just use the gas that we have access to. And so the way that I think about that is like, okay, you should have to pay to the public for the right to drill, but once you pay for the right to drill, or rather rent the right to drill for a period of time, I think that's totally fine for you to be able to drill as much as you want during that period of time, assuming that you're not, polluting the environment around you. And so, therefore, the way I would think about that is that once you've paid for that rental, you now have the right to pump as much gas as you want, and so all of that gas is owned by you. And so the result of that gas, whether it be plastics or whatever it might be, is owned by you. And so because you own those plastics, now those plastics can be sold as commodities.
Interesting. So that's interesting. Right off the bat, just listening from this, it sounds very unintuitive as a system because it almost seems like backwards. It almost seems like so like the most convenient way of an economic system operating would seem like private property, and then you have like a centralized overarching force that kind of regulates the private property. But you're saying in this system, Georgism, is that off the bat the government owns everything automatically, and then the
So it's
people.
not, yeah. So I don't think that the government should own anything. In my ideal, like I'm saying that given that someone is going to have control over the natural resources, no one worked to create the natural resources. So I don't think that there's a legitimate argument to say this is a natural resource that I earn the right to own the natural resource. I can be more useful in exploiting the natural resource than other people, but that's different than me having a right to own it. And so I think that I owe something to the rest of society if I'm going to monopolize control over a certain natural resource. Now, realistically, like communism is stupid, right? The idea of like everyone is going to have equal access to the earth is dumb, just practically speaking, setting aside the like ideological defenses for it. Just like the practical implications of like everyone wants to live in their house that is their house, right? Everyone wants to like it doesn't make sense for every single person to be making their independent well. It makes sense to have one very deep well, for example, right?
Yeah, it's
And so
impossible.
yeah, so practically, you need to allow for certain amounts of monopolies to arise naturally in terms of certain natural resources, and that's okay so long as those monopolies are paying for the right to have those monopolies, and specifically, they're not paying like any individual, but rather they're paying for that right and paying all of society for that right.
Wait, can I ask you why you think a public monopoly is better than a private monopoly?
It's not that I think that a public monopoly is better. It's that I think that I certainly don't think that like the government should necessarily control the water, or certainly definitely not that they should control all of the land. But what I do think is that the people, the public, should be the ones who are paid for the access to, for the right to have that monopolistic control. Right? That's different than they should have the monopolistic control. Right? Control is different than ownership. Right? Like I control the place that I'm renting, for example. I don't actually rent, I own. But like if I were a renter, I control the place that I rent. But that's different. They don't have the right, as even as the landlord, to just like barge in the middle of the night without warning, right? But that's different than the ownership. And so my critique is like the ownership structure is a problem, even if the way that the control is manifesting is conceptually defensible.
Interesting. So, if you had to cost benefit analysis between Ancapistan, where everything's private property, and there's multiple corporations that own things that are, let's say, resources that are limited or scarce, like oil or water, versus the Georgist model, where the government has ownership over, or would you say it's control or ownership? You would say ownership,
I would
right?
say the government has the government as a stand-in for the people would have ownership over the natural resources, but not control over the natural resources. There would be exceptions.
Right.
I'm in support of like public parks, but broadly speaking, the overwhelming majority of land, and certainly the overwhelming majority of non-land natural resources, setting aside water as well, maybe, would be in the control of corporations, generally speaking, potentially individuals, but broadly corporations. But the ownership would be in the hands of the government. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Okay. So, besides those few things, is everything else basically the same as a normal government? Is this a democracy? Is it a republic? Is it a constitutional republic? What kind of what are we dealing with?
So the first thing that I would say is like the principle that I'm laying out all of that from is a principle that natural resources, no one worked to create them, and a result of no one working to create the natural resources, we should all have equal dibs, just sort of by right. And no one worked except for you for your labor, and so therefore you should have exclusive dibs on your own labor, right? That's the sort of like baseline that I'm coming from for that. It's very separate than like my belief in democracy. I do support democracy, but I would separate that out as like a different ideological frame, if that makes sense.
Okay, I do want to be clear. What you're saying is collectivist ideology, or it's a collectivist foundation, where you believe that people have equal dibs on. Yeah, where you believe that people have equal dibs on resources that they don't own, right? So like, you believe in positive rights.
Hold on, you're saying don't own, but my point is like, no one worked to create. So like, I believe that ownership is the result of work, right? If I own myself, and as a product of owning myself, if I work for Staples or whatever the fuck it is, for an hour and a half, and they pay me whatever it is that they pay me, then I deserve what I'm paid by Staples, right? That's like very simple and like intuitive to me. But the idea that I own like this sort of I own the water, like it doesn't make more sense to me that like I own the water than for me to own the air, right? Like parse the difference for me between owning water and owning air.
Well, I mean, you could own air, right? Like if you like got a
So
box or
let's
something?
propose that okay, let's propose that I just decide that I own all of the air, and now I make
Hmm.
you pay me to have access to the air.
Yeah,
That sounds absurd, right?
and impossible, but yeah.
No, but let's presume a situation where it is conceptually possible, right? Where I am
Hmm.
able, in the same way that, and by the way, obviously, it would have massive downstream consequences for society, like the same way that
Yeah.
water companies will bottle water, but they will also, in doing so, pollute the rivers, making it so that other people will not be able to have clean drinking water. Propose that I'm able to figure out some way where I can pollute the air and simultaneously make myself have a massive stockpile of clean air, right? That seems like something that obviously you oppose, presumably. So I'm curious why that's different than bottling water.
Well, I guess it depends on how you get the air. It would depend on the lead up to it, right? Because if you were like some, let's say you're some like Mars tycoon, right?
Let's not do
And
that. Let's do it in the same
no,
way that. So the way the waters work, companies work, is that they literally just go to sources of water, they bottle up a fuck ton of it, right? And then they also, by virtue of doing that, there's a bunch of plastics that get into the water, and the rest of the water is fucked, right? So in the same way, I'm just going to capture. I'm going to make a giant like airbag and capture a fuck ton of air and like force it into like tanks in the same way that there are like tanks of air for scuba diving. So they're going to be like compressed air. And by virtue of doing that, the result is that there's significantly less air in the area, and as a result of there not being as much air in the area, now the only way for people to survive is by heavily breathing all of the time, and potentially dying anyway, or by paying for my air. Is that
okay,
fair? Can I?
yeah, I guess, but in practical terms, it's probably not practical.
I'm not saying it's practical. I'm saying that morally, I don't make a moral distinction
Okay,
between the
well,
thing I described with air and the thing that is described with water. And I'm curious why you would make a moral distinction.
so first of all,
Practically, I,
we're gonna have to break the conversation into two parts, and we're gonna have to go down one of the routes. Okay, so there's a difference between morals and utility, and we have to figure out which one we want to go down. Now, I don't believe in morals because, well, they're not proven. So the way we can go down this is we can go down a value-based system where we go down a consequentialist system. If you want to do that, so we can
sure.
continue. We can
Yeah.
continue with
What are
the
the
idea of like
yeah, sure.
the
What are the
practicality of boxing
yeah,
up air.
oh, essentially, what's the consequence of me claiming to own the air? What's the consequence of me claiming to own the water? And why are they different?
What's the consequence of it? What do you mean? You gotta
Yeah.
be more specific.
Well, if I own all of the water, then everyone is my slave, right?
Well, they're not your slave if you own all the water. You're talking about
But they are.
indirect coercion, right?
Yeah, but the point is that I am able to do whatever I want to them because without me, they will die.
Right. You have a
If I own
monopolization
all
of
of
a
the air, then
resource. You have a monopolization of a really important resource, and
yeah,
they essentially, if they want to live, they'll have to do whatever you say. Yeah, I
yeah.
understand what you're saying.
So if you're trying to control the water, then you are directly attacking other people by trying to take control of the water.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is a violation of the NAP if you want to go sort of in that direction, right? To take water.
Yeah, but here's where that's not going to work on me. The reason I believe in the NAP is not because of its moral basis. The reason I believe in the NAP is because of its practical basis.
Okay, the practical implication of
Mm-hmm.
owning all of the water is that now I own you.
That's not what that means, but I understand what
So
you're saying. You have monopolization of a
all of
resource
the
that
water.
people will die if they don't listen
Yeah.
to
So
you.
if I own you, conceptually, you can just not do what I say, which will result in you being dead. If I own all of the water, conceptually, you can just not do what I want you to do, which will result in you being dead. So
Mm-hmm.
what's the difference?
What do you mean? You die in neither circumstance. If you own the water, if you own the air, they
So
die.
like slavery is slavery only in as much as I'd prefer slavery over death.
Uh-huh.
And so the slavery of someone controlling all of the water is slavery only in as much as I want water, which is to say only in as much as I want to not be dead. So it's one to
It's
one. They're circumstances.
It's okay. It's not slavery. There's a difference between direct and indirect coercion. Okay, indirect coercion is this idea that you have something that people want or need, and if they don't give it to you, you'll be like really unhappy or you'll die or whatever. But the people aren't owed you something just because you need it. That's a moral imperative.
I agree that I'm not owed it just because I need it. But my point is that I took it, right? Naturally, I am not the controller of all water. Naturally, I am not the controller of your body. By virtue of enslaving you, I have taken away all other options for you other than death or being controlled by me. By virtue of controlling all, I have taken away all other options for you other than being controlled by me or death.
Okay, but to be clear, you're not enslaving people. You're using indirect coercion on them, which is not the same thing.
Okay, so how are you defining indirect versus direct coercion?
Sure. Let me pull up my document for that. So, indirect coercion refers to situations where people's decisions are influenced by external factors that create pressure on them, even though there's no explicit threat, force, or compulsion. So, this is when someone is. So, direct coercion would be like, do this or I'll harm you. Indirect coercion is more like, if it's not a direct threat, but it's like, if you don't have that thing, you'll be less happy or you'll die or something like that.
I tell my kid, right? I'm a horrible parent. I'm an abusive parent. I tell my kid, right? Do this, or I will not feed you. Is that coercive?
Well, yeah, because in that scenario, kids or children can't consent.
Okay, fine. It's not a kid. Let's say I do this to my girlfriend. Do this, or I will not let you eat food. Is that coercive?
Well, like, are you in control of her? Like, she can't leave or anything?
I control all of the food. The only food she could potentially access is through me.
Like you have all the food in the world? Like,
yes, this is hypothetical. I have all the food in the world.
It wouldn't be coercion by definition. But it would suck for her. Because you're essentially, it's transaction. What you're saying right now is a transaction. You do this or I do this. Because if you own the food, you're in your right.
I'm saying if I am the only person with access to food in the world, like, you can potentially conceptualize a version of events wherein, like, maybe I do have a right to all of the food in the world, but the point remains that it is obviously coercive, even in that example, which is different than if I specifically am on a spaceship, for example, and I siphon off all of the air from the entire spaceship into one department of the spaceship, right? And everyone on the rest of the spaceship is going to die because they don't have air, or I will let the air go back into their area. Right? But I say, before I do that, you need to put all of your money and half of the food and half of the water into my department, and I'm going to cut my part of the ship away from your part of the ship, and I'm going to run off into the sunset with half of the money, half of the food, and half of the water. Right? If I did that, I'm coercing them, right?
Well, listen, bro, you can call it whatever you want, but
no. My point is, like, it matters that is coercion, because it matters to understand that taking away someone's air, is a violation of their rights.
Okay, so, well, first off, what you need to understand is actually, I didn't tell you my position, but I'll tell you it now. I'm a practical libertarian. So what that means is, I have no moral ties to the NAP. The NAP is a methodology to achieving maximum utility for everyone, for individuals. So the way I operate my system is based on how the world works. It's not based on hard rules like coercion or anything. My system is based on what makes individuals the maximum happiness. Yeah, so if you bring these hypotheticals up of like trapping all the air in the world, then my methodology changes, right? So like if you got all the air in the world and you were going to like hold it from 6 billion people, the 6 billion people would be justified in killing you because that is the root to maximum utility for all individuals.
Okay, this is good. So my first point there is, like, I was claiming that it is coercive. I was not necessarily claiming that just because it's coercive, therefore you must kill me.
Right.
But I am saying, but I do think it's important to recognize that would be an example of coercion, right? And I think the same would be true if I took all of the water on the ship.
Sorry, so I'm using a legal definition. That's why I'm super careful with it. Now, if you're talking about like some sort of moral coercion, I don't believe in morals, but I'm talking about legally. So I'm talking about legally binding terms.
I reject that outright. You do not care about law.
And I do care about law.
I think that it is silly to pretend that you care about law, because obviously I could construct a bunch of laws and you'd say you have to break those laws, right? If I construct the law, if I construct the law that says we must round up all the Jews and throw them into internment camps, you'd oppose that law, right?
Are you talking about justification for law?
Yeah, I'm saying that, like, you can. I'm in support of the idea of law, but I'm not in support of you defining your morality on the basis of law. Law
no, bro,
should be
morality doesn't exist. Morality doesn't exist.
Okay, fine. Your understanding of utility, right, should be upstream of your understanding of law. Law should be something that is useful in as much it is beneficial to the utility, your function that you're trying to focus on.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
but
that's right.
Focusing on law as a defense of your utility system is not fair.
Say that again?
Focusing on the law system as a defense of your utility system is not fair, because the law is downstream, not upstream, of that understanding, right?
The law is the means to the ends.
Yes.
So the laws will shape on the most effective way to achieve the value.
Correct. So therefore, you cannot look to law as a defense for your system. You have to look at your system as a defense for law.
Okay. Did I say something that went against that?
I think that you, didn't you just say that something was defended because it is the law? Like, I should look into law?
I don't know. You're gonna have to give me a specific example of what I said.
Yeah, I'm not taking notes because I'm walking my dog.
No, you're good. You're good.
Cardinals, we can move forward. Yeah, what were you saying?
Yeah, no. I mean, I basically, put my position out there. All I was saying is, with the radical hypotheticals, those hypotheticals seem to hinge on the idea of people who are like moral absolutists, where I have no qualms with breaking laws and creating new laws as long as it updates the methodology to the most effective way to achieving the maximum well-being for individuals.
So I agree that breaking unjust laws is sometimes defensible. However, I would say that in constructing our law system, we should try to seek to make our law system justifiable, broadly speaking, right?
Yes, consistent. It has to be completely consistent, non-arbitrary.
Okay, so if it's consistent and non-arbitrary, and this is an example where stealing all of the water or stealing all of the air would therefore be a reason to kill you, it would therefore be a reason to, like, break any laws that exist in order to ensure my absolute right to have access to air and my absolute right to have access to water, then I have an absolute right to both air and water, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. If it was possible for you to do that, the laws would change, but it's not possible to do that. It's not practical.
Okay, whether it's practical or not, the point is that, like, the law must be constructed such that the thing that I just described ought to be illegal, right? Regardless of whether or not something is yet practical, if it is conceptually doable in some conceivable universe, then, and we understand it to be unjust, then we should construct our laws, ideally, to avoid that kind of environment happening, right?
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now, the less intense versions of this, right? It's not as bad, obviously, as what I'm describing, but it is pretty bad. Is like Nestle, right? So Nestle controls a fuck ton of water in places like Nigeria or in places like Sudan, right? They own a fuck ton of the water, and as a result of owning a fuck ton of the water, they're able to essentially have a monopoly on access to clean drinking water. And as a result, a bunch of children and adults also, but, like, let's bleed on the heartstrings or whatever, a bunch of people are going to die as a result of Nestle having monopolistic control over the water. This seems unjustifiable, right?
I have a question
Particularly,
Did
those
Nestle
people.
get the water first, or was somebody using it before them?
Of course, people were using it before them, but they didn't use it in the same way as Nestle is, in the same way that you have not claimed to own the air, right? No one had claimed to own the water, but obviously you're using the air, and obviously they were using the water.
I understand. You're getting into hardcore libertarian legal system territory here, and the libertarian answer to this is you keep the non-aggression principle, but in this territory, it's the idea of there's like a stream and like a village of people are using a stream, and if a corporation comes up and if they block in the stream or build a fence around it and say we claim this stream, technically that would be an aggression because the stream was already in use by people. So in terms of the NAP, that would be illegal.
My point is, all water is in use. All air is in use, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so
do you understand that they violated the NAP though?
I'm sorry?
They violated the libertarian law.
Yes. If you use water, right, in a way that makes it impossible for me to use water, then you are violating the NAP against me. Yes.
Yeah, because whoever gets there first owns the water.
It's not just a matter of whoever gets there first, because I'd also say that it is a violation to stop someone from being able to access fresh drinking water, even if you're the first person on Mars, right? If nuclear apocalypse happens, and as a result, there are 100,000 survivors, a lucky few, who manage to escape Earth before the nuclear apocalypse happens. And I happen to be the guy who gets there first. And then what I do is I nuke all of, I use this argument against Liquid Zulu, and I'm curious how you respond to it. I then all of Mars. By virtue of nuking Mars, right, I have now changed really all of Mars. I have constructed it in my own image. I have used Mars, right? And by virtue of doing that, now I own all of Mars. And so now all of the other 100,000 people who have come here, in order to not violate my right to own Mars, must be my slaves. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
That seems obviously absurd. It seems obviously that I have no better claimant on Mars because I happen to get there 15 minutes before the rest of them than they do.
Yeah, so you nuke Mars and there's a little stream left and then you're like, this is my stream basically?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I own, post nuking Mars, I now own all of Mars. And so all of these 100,000 people, their only potential access to water is the snow caps or ice caps or whatever they are on Mars that I managed to nuke into becoming no longer ice. They're now water, right?
Yeah.
And that's their only access to water, and they're running
out.
So
I'll give you my answer, and then you have to let me explain. Okay.
Go for it.
Okay, so according to the NAP, you would be okay with owning that little land, right? So you were the first one to Mars. Somehow you get access to 30 nukes, and then you explode the planet, but you keep a little stream for yourself. You build a fence around it. Yeah, according to the NAP, you would be in the right. You'd be okay with keeping the land, but I guess the thing here is the NAP. No, sorry, it's the other way around. The alternative is worse, right? Because if you don't go by the first come first serve principle, essentially, if you get to a land first, then people are just allowed to come there and murder you and take your land, and then people are allowed to go there and murder them and take their land. So you have to abide by the first come first serve principle. Otherwise, it'll only be might makes right because there's no alternative.
Not my alternative. Now I'll describe the alternative. The alternative is that everyone gets there, and everyone says, okay, I want to have this piece, I want to have this piece. And everyone else is like, well, what the fuck? You shouldn't have that piece. And so what you have to do, you have to pay everyone else for a right to rent this piece, right? So the money is owed not to an individual, but rather to everyone, to society, to all 100,000 survivors. And that aggregate fund, that pool of money, is now going to be used towards infrastructural improvements that are to the benefit of all society, ideally elected.
Wait, are we still on Mars?
Say it again?
Are we still on Mars in this hypothetical?
Yeah.
Okay, so wait,
So
what do you do to the guy who owns the little stream? What do you do to him?
they don't
You
own it.
just take it?
Yeah, we take it. Too bad.
Okay.
He doesn't have any right above and beyond anyone else. We all have equal right to Mars. The fact that he got here 15 minutes before doesn't mean jack shit. Fuck off. What does matter is that we have to figure out some way to coexist. And so what we're going to do is, if you want to have exclusive right to control, not own, but control this particular plot of land, that's totally chill. You can do that. The way you're going to pay for it is by paying into society or infrastructural improvements on that land that are going to be to the benefit of society. And then 20, 30 years down the line, that will then be, again, back into the rented rotation, and other people can potentially rent it, or you can rent it again.
Okay, but bro, like, you're essentially advocating for might makes right.
No. We're both arguing for might makes right.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are. The guy
How?
who got there, his first act was to nuke everything, except for this one stream, and then he to presumably kill anyone who tries to take his stream from him. Right? So that is might makes right.
No, because if you own a piece of land, a piece of private property, are you saying that you're not allowed to defend your property?
I don't think that that's his property because he got there 15 minutes early.
Well, it doesn't matter. It could be anything. It could be a toothbrush. Let's say you pick up a stick and then somebody comes and they're like, "Oh, I want that stick." And you're like, "No, it's my stick." And they take it from you. Are they justified in taking it from you?
It's purely different, as I already laid out. Toothbrush is the result of oil made into plastic, right? And so the oil, I am saying potentially you could design a system such that I have to pay for the right to have access to pulling this oil out of the ground, and as a result of having pumping rights, now I'm able to pump the fuck out of it. Now this oil is mine. I'm able to give it to someone else who has a factory. He makes it into plastic. He makes it into a toothbrush, and he sells it to someone. That's all Gucci. That's all the result of the labor. What's not the result of labor is the undergirding oil itself.
Okay, bro, but you are like, it doesn't matter the process of creating land. What matters is private property rights, first come first served principle, and self defense. And if you don't believe in these things, then you don't have a consistent legal system.
No. What I'm saying is, whether you agree with it or not, what I just laid out was consistent, right? What was inconsistent about what I described?
The justification for taking it from the person.
Yes, the justification is it's not taking it, it's not his to begin with, right? The justification is we all have equal right to the natural resources, and you have exclusive right to your labor. That's the justification, right? Whether you agree with that justification is separate than whether or not it is a justification that is logically coherent, if perhaps wrong, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So don't say it's not logically coherent when it is, right?
Yeah, no, just give me a sec. Go ahead.
Okay, so it's logically coherent. You disagree with it, but it's logically coherent. So the question is, in the environment that I'm describing on Mars, the result is that hundreds of thousands of people, all of the survivors, perhaps all but one, because the one dude nuked it and then potentially fought off and got killed, whatever. But all the other 100,000 are now in an environment where they're able to build out all of Mars productively, right, based on a free market system, in that they're trading, in that the value of the land is that they're paying for is the actual value of the land as associated with the value that everyone else lays to it, right? No one is coming in with a massive, huge ungained amount of money or power, save for the capital they've already accrued on Earth, save for the skills and whatever they've already accrued on Earth. And so everyone there is going to obviously have to work hard, because obviously they're like shit because they survived this nuclear apocalypse or whatever. But none of them are going to own each other, right? They'll all have choices as to where they're going to live. They'll all have choices as to who their boss is going to be, or if they'll have a boss even. The environment that you're describing, everyone has one king who controls the entirety of the human population, and that one king is able to do literally whatever the fuck he wants by virtue of having gotten there 15 minutes early.
Okay, so I see what you're saying, but the alternative is worse, because you're assuming that you're assuming the communist ideology that every natural resource on the planet is owned by everyone on the planet, because you can't create an arbitrary line out of nowhere saying that how do you know that one natural resource is meant for someone and another natural resource is meant for someone else? So when you say that we have collective ownership over something, such as a
Wait, I want to answer that. They pay for it.
Go ahead.
They pay for it. The way that I know that
who do they pay it to? Who do they pay it to?
Everyone else into the system.
Yes, because you're saying they have collective ownership.
Okay, collective ownership and collective control are not the same thing. The problem with communism is not the collective ownership. The problem is the collective control, right? The fact that Russia fell apart is the result of command economies, right? I'm not describing a command economy. I'm describing an economy that is entirely based on the decisions made by individuals in order to have trade that is mutually beneficial for each of those individuals, right?
Sure.
Okay, so calling it communism is silly. It is not command control by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, hold on, because you would agree that ownership is, you have the final say on what happens to it, right? So like a landlord is an owner of a building, but a renter has control of the building. But through the legal system, technically the owner has the final say to what happens to that property.
Going by. I have to just give me 15 seconds. I apologize.
Yeah, you're good.
Give me 15 seconds to get out of the busy road. And okay, repeat yourself. I'm sorry about that. What were you saying?
Cool. So, like I was saying before, ownership is essentially having the final say or the entire say over something. So, a landlord can rent their property out to a person, and that renter has control over the property. But the landlord owns the property, so they have the final say. They can technically kick the renter out whenever they want because they have full control over it.
That's not true. If I own a giant warehouse and Walmart is going to rent the giant warehouse for 10 years, that is very different than just renting month to month in the context of housing. So the way that it functions for Walmart is that the person who owns it, for that 10 years, there are certain cases, depending on how the contract is written up, that they literally are not allowed to go inside for that 10 years. Walmart's
yeah, bro, you're using the most extreme laws. You're using California, New York system laws.
I'm taking the example of Walmart because that's what it looks like in real life when you're renting something for a period of 10 years. And I'm not even arguing for renting something for a period of 10 years. I'm potentially arguing for renting something for a period of 20 or 30 years, right? For a very long period of time. And during that period of time, you're able to do whatever the fuck you want. And certainly, the owners of that Walmart location cannot just barge in and tell Walmart to close up shop.
Do you understand the point I'm raising about ownership? It doesn't have to be ownership over real estate. That was one example. It can be ownership over anything. It can be ownership over a piece of equipment. It can be ownership over a car. A person who's an owner has the final say over that piece of property.
Yeah. The point is, different rental structures have different rental rights. And the rental rights that Walmart has are most akin to the rental rights that I'm describing. That's very different than the rental rights of I'm borrowing your lawnmower for the afternoon.
So you're missing my point over pedantry. You're missing my point. Do you understand what I'm saying with my point?
There's a categorical difference between the way that Walmart is renting a warehouse for 10 years versus the way that I rent the lawnmower for 10 hours. That's not a pedantic distinction. That's a different distinction in kind, right?
Do you understand my point?
I don't, because the control version, the control that I'm describing when I'm in control over the lawnmower for 10 hours is a control strictly of my ability to physically move it. It is not a control in as much as I'm able to do things to the lawnmower. Whereas in the case of the Walmart warehouse, they're allowed to do things to that warehouse for a period of 10 years.
Yeah, via contract law.
Yeah. So my point is the contract law that I'm describing, the way that it would control would manifest would be that you pay into the system to control that plot of land for a period of years, right? And so you're going to pay a bunch if you have a really prime plot, and you're going to pay virtually nothing if you have not a prime plot. And by virtue of now paying that amount is going to go into infrastructural improvements, stuff like roads, and also the result is going to be that I have control now over this plot of land.
All right.
Not
So
just rental capacity to use it, but control over it.
Sure. I'm going to lay out the problems with this system. So you say that we have collective ownership over, let's say, a stream, okay? And essentially what this means is that anybody who wants to use it is going to have to pay into a system, but you're missing a few key important details. Number one, who controls or who has the final say over what happens to this property? Number two, where is the payment going to? Who is it going towards? Number three, what if...
I'm sorry. Wait. I can't write these down because I'm still walking. Can I take them one by one?
Yeah, sure.
If you want to write them, write them all down if you want to, because I don't want you to forget them, but I also don't want to forget them as you go through them.
I'll write them down. All right,
awesome. When you're ready, to just
so the first one is who is paid. That's the first one.
Yeah. So the answer to one is that in the example where dude gets there first, one guy gets paid. And the answer for my system is that instead of one guy getting paid, all of society is able to be the beneficiaries of this payment.
So they split up the profits evenly?
That's one way to do it, or they can vote on how to distribute it. I can conceive of like either you could just do a UBI system that would work, or you could do a system where everyone's like, hey, we desperately need like XYZ specific things that are going to make everyone's lives easier. And so maybe we should pay for these things using this publicly owned money. But the question of who, like that it is public or private money is separate than how it is going to be used.
Okay, so who organizes this?
I can answer that question, but I want to recognize that like that is a different question than whether or not we collectively should own it. The question of how we use public money isn't the same of what is and is not public money.
Well, yeah, we kind of steamrolled past that point, though. We were just getting right into the...
So my point is, like, my conception of what is public money is the money that is resultant of no one's labor. It's the money that is the resultant of simply the value of natural resources that no one worked to create. And so that's public because no one has a right to it any more than anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, so like the problem with that, the problem with believing that, you know, property is collectively owned by everyone is that some Chinese kid, you know, in China owns a portion of the pond in, you know, like Georgia or something. Like everybody has ownership over every resource. That's essentially what you're saying, and that's practically impossible.
I'm not saying that. I
that is what you're saying.
So I am someone who believes in unions, and one of the kinds of unions that I believe in is land-based union, right? So the government of America, in my view, is a land-based union. It's an understanding of this is the space that we all agree is part of this space. And so it's arbitrary that we've decided this is someone who's a part of the union, this is not someone part of the union. But in as much as you support the idea of states, in as much as you believe in the idea of unions, this particular kind of union, this land-based union, it's defensible.
What do you mean? What do you mean it's defensible? What does that mean?
I think that you are allowed to say that, like, these are rules for my union, right?
Yeah.
You can join my union, you cannot join my union. I think that's chill, right? Now, if I say you can't join my union, there are downstream consequences for you not being able to join my union. But too bad, so sad. It's my union, and we collectively have agreed to make it a union.
So it sounds like a government, basically.
That's what I'm saying.
State. Okay.
Land-based unions. Yes, land-based unions are states. Now, land-based unions are not the only type of union. There are other types of unions. There are corporate unions, right? Corporations, in order to like work together in order to build a product, and that's also something I think is defensible. But obviously, if there are going to be corporate institutions, those corporate institutions are going to have downstream consequences, potentially, to the people who are not members of that corporate institution. But I think it's still defensible to have a corporate institution.
Okay, so does this land union, do they own a part of property, in like the state, like every part of property in the state that they live in?
I think that is conceptually defensible when it is done at scale. But I think that it is, if you were asking me, like, in my utopia, would there be states? My answer is probably not.
Right. Well, I'm looking at like the legal mechanisms by which you're considering this. So when I ask you, like, do they all own a portion of the property? Like, do they? Because I'm gonna scale this obviously to test your logic, but I just want to start, locally. Like, do they own a share of everything in their local vicinity?
Yeah. So my answer is, as life currently exists, we have states. I don't support, in a perfect world, the existence of states. But if states are going to exist, the least bad option in terms of how to construct to deal with the existence of states is to do as I'm describing, right?
Right.
That's a least bad option, but I don't like it.
That's fine. I'm just making sure, like, because even in your ideal state, you'll have an enforcement mechanism to make sure that everybody's, civil.
Everyone has enforcement mechanisms for every system. Yes.
Yeah. So you can call it a state or not, it doesn't really matter. All I care about is the enforcement mechanism that you have. But yeah, so you'll own a portion of the property in the state that you live in. So, like, because I don't even know. So you would consider.
I actually don't even agree with the idea that I own a portion of it. I think that, like, we collectively are responsible for it. But even if the majority of people in America wanted to nuke America, I would still be opposed to that. And I think that that's a violation of the rights of the unborn. But that's probably an edge case. So yeah, go on.
Okay. So everybody collectively owns. You don't believe in shares, so they don't own a percentage. They just all own it together.
Yeah. So the way I describe it is like, are you familiar with trusts?
What'd you say?
Are you familiar with trusts? Like, rich people have trusts.
Yeah, like trusts that they give as inheritance to their kids.
You can be the beneficiary of a trust, but you don't actually have ownership over the trust, in as much as, like, a trust can be designed so that the beneficiaries are you and all of your descendants. And so, therefore, like, I don't, even if I have a trust, get to just use all of the sort of the value there. I'm only entitled to, like, a portion of the interest accumulated on an annual basis, right? Mm-hmm. And so, by virtue of being able to get that portion of the interest accumulated, like, I'm the beneficiary, but I don't actually own the trust, because my unborn children are conceptually going to be the ones who are going to be the beneficiaries of the trust upon my death. So I don't own the trust, but it's my trust.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Okay, so going back to the collective ownership deal, you don't believe in homesteading to have ownership. You just believe that you do own it. You don't have to homestead it.
My point is collective beneficiaries. I think that, like, the idea of collective ownership as a description of what I'm making, I think, is a little bit imprecise. I'm describing us as the collective beneficiaries, which is different in as much as, like, we are not allowed to do whatever the fuck we want. We're only allowed to accrue the benefits of the interest, but the actual, like, undergirding, like, principle is still owned not just by us, but also by our descendants.
Okay, that's
with a principle.
That is a little bit strange, because it seems that there would only be a binary between, singular ownership and collective ownership. There wouldn't be any in between. Even a beneficiary.
Is the way trusts are currently designed for the beneficiaries of trusts.
Because if you're a beneficiary, do you have control over it?
No, you have control over the interest, but the actual principle is stuck in an index fund or whatever the fuck. You can't touch the principal. You can only trust. You can only touch a portion of, or potentially all of, but most of the time it's generally a portion of the interest. it's built off of the principle. But you can't touch the principle itself.
Yeah, but like, can you like drink some of the water on the land?
Yeah, by doing that, you're not fucking with the principle because you'll pee it out, and then it'll go back into the water system.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. You're saying be good stewards of nature, right? Because
that's all I'm saying.
You want it to keep, like a rich family, you want the money to keep growing, so you'll only take out as much as you need to continue surviving.
Well, it's not.
I understand that, but I don't understand the justification for it. I understand that's a good idea, but I don't understand your justification for why we ought to do that.
It's not just what you need. It could potentially be less than you need. You could imagine like, oh fuck, I got a hospital bill or whatever, and my trust only gives me $20,000 a year. It's not a huge trust or whatever, and so that's not enough. But I can't touch the principle. The way that it's designed, I'm not allowed to touch the principle, even if I need the principle. It's not my choice. I don't get to touch the principle. I'm not legally entitled to it.
Yeah, but so forgetting that, because you're creating the legal system. You're creating the legal system, right? So
yeah,
the question is, why specifically are you creating it this way?
Yes, because I don't believe that by virtue of the fact that I got here first, that I have some moral right over the water that extends beyond the unborn or the people who haven't gotten here, right? And so therefore I don't get to destroy the water, even if I want to.
Okay.
It's just like a right that I have. Even if I have a right to use the water, I don't have a right to destroy the water.
Okay, cool. I mean, it's generous of you. I don't think it's a good legal idea, but...
Wait, of course it's a good legal idea. If you're trying to design your legal idea in order to protect, like, utility, I'm gonna die at some point. You don't want on my deathbed for me to go, fuck it, and destroy everything, right?
No, of course not.
Okay, so like, you want to design a structure such that it is illegal to just destroy everything on the way out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we have too many fundamental disagreements on this because, like, I don't think you believe in private property rights.
I do.
So, no, you don't.
I believe you own your toothbrush because your toothbrush is the product of something that was rented, which is to say, the right to pump the oil, and then it was built out of the product of that thing that you rented. I believe that you are able to own your spoon, your wooden spoon, because your wooden spoon is the result of someone renting access to a plot of land. On that plot of land, they grow a bunch of trees, and then they chop down those trees, as is their right, because they're renting the land. And then by virtue of chopping down those trees, they're able to make a bunch of wood, and that wood is cut up by people who have a right to the utensils that they're using to cut it up the wood, and then that wood becomes a spoon, and you buy that spoon in exchange for the labor of you working for Subway. All of that is
true. Chill. That is how you get spoons, working for Subway.
Yeah, that's a totally chill, valid way for you to own the spoon. The spoon is the product.
Yeah.
Or so, it's not directly the product of your labor. It is rather the product of your purchase using what is the product of your labor, which is money.
I'm seeing two distinct systems here, though, which is the idea of somebody, lands on a property and then they homestead that property versus everybody is a beneficiary in the collective property. So they all share that property. Those are two very different things. So technically speaking, every single resource would be collectively beneficiary to everyone.
Yeah. So the resources. So there's two different types of resource, right? So there's renewable and non-renewable. So like the wood example that I just used is probably more directly clear than the oil, which we can get into the oil because I do have a defense for the oil. But in the case of the wood is renewable, right? You just build more trees or you farm more trees, right? And by farming more trees, you're able to have more wood, and that wood can be used to make more products, right? And so that is a renewable, and so you're not fucking anyone over by you paid for the right to have use and control over this plot of land for 30 years. And during that 30 years, you plant a bunch of trees, and then you are able to grow those trees, and then you are able to chop down those trees and use them as wood. And you're able to sell that wood. And everything's Gucci. Everything's Gucci because you paid everyone for access to the soil, you paid everyone for access to the water, and this product is the product of your labor because you've already paid for the component of that value, which really there is a component of that value that is the product of the land, is the product of the water. But the value that you're left with, having paid for those things, is only the value of your labor and nothing else.
Sure. I mean, I fundamentally disagree with your system, but I understand where you're coming from.
Okay, so lay out your system.
You already know my system, bro. I'm a libertarian.
No. Yeah, well, I don't actually believe that you're a libertarian, right? I think you claim to be a libertarian. I don't actually think that you have a coherent libertarian analysis.
I mean, I already told you. So it's the first come, first serve principle, private property rights, and
no. You're describing
what the last one is.
You're describing your views in reference to land. I'm saying set aside land for a second. Define libertarian. What does it mean to be libertarian?
Well, I guess in the most basic way, it's to believe in liberty.
Okay. Lay out. So I laid out a view of, your labor's yours. Natural resources would work to make those, and so it's no one's labor, and so fuck it. No individual gets to own the natural resources, but you definitely don't get to own your labor. I'm asking for a short and simple, like 2-sentence equivalent thesis on what you're thinking of. This is what libertarianism is, as like a 2-sentence thesis.
Would voluntarism, would that be enough for you?
Define it, maybe.
So voluntarism is just the idea of living voluntarily with people, except for the only time you'd use violence is for self-defense reasons.
Okay, you only use violence with self-defense, but we've already described that if I take all the air from you, it's self-defense for you to kill me.
So, in this legal system, no. Because you homesteaded the air.
No. I'm asking, as you just described voluntarism. Repeat.
Sorry, go ahead.
Repeat again your definition of voluntarism.
So voluntarism, I don't have the exact definition, but voluntarism is just it's the idea of having natural hierarchies. There's you live in a society without any unjust hierarchies. So all hierarchies are natural forming voluntarily.
I'm asking, okay, so all hierarchies are naturally forming, voluntarily forming hierarchies.
Yes.
Okay. I do not believe that it is a voluntary hierarchy that I took all of the air and you don't have access to air, and therefore you must do whatever I say in order to have access to air. That seems involuntary, right?
The alternative is worse, though, of collective ownership over air.
We're not talking about the alternative right now. I'm saying what you've just said, in terms of voluntary, it is not voluntary to be forced to be my slave or forced to do what I tell you to do by virtue of the fact that I control the air. That's not voluntary.
Well, it is, and I can explain why, because it depends on who homesteads it. I don't think it's possible to be able to own air because you would have to capture it in some way. You laid out your example of creating a giant bubble or something to trap all the air. But I mean, that's a hypothetical situation. It's not possible. Legally speaking, yes, we would let you keep all that air, but in terms of the real world, it couldn't happen.
It is possible to control the air. It is possible to have air. I already have, I've scuba dived before in my life, right?
Yeah.
That's an example that has been captured for a specific purpose by me. Now, the difference is that I'm not keeping that air in perpetuity, and I'm not keeping it from anyone, right? So it's fine to have that air for a period of time, and then I blow out the bubbles, and it becomes air again, and ta-da, everything's chill, right? But I could keep on doing that over and over and over and capture all of the air. Maybe not all of it, but a sufficient amount that it becomes very difficult to breathe in a certain area.
Yes, but you wouldn't be enslaving us if you did that.
No, I would be, because by doing that, I am not just doing a thing of let Jonah scuba dive. I'm doing a thing of don't let anyone else breathe. It is now a violation of your voluntary nature. It's no longer voluntary for you to pay me to have access to air. You must do it or you will die. That's a violation of your voluntary system.
No, so the difference, the reason that we're not on the same page here is because we fundamentally believe in two different things. I believe in negative rights, you believe in positive rights. And so,
Definitely not true. I believe in negative rights.
well, I'm sure you believe in negative rights too, but you believe in both negative and positive rights, whereas
No.
I only believe in negative rights.
What I'm describing is a negative right. How are you defining negative?
What? Negative right? Hold on.
Define negative right. What do you mean by that?
A negative right is the right to not be enslaved, the right to pursue one's goals. It's essentially having someone not come in and aggress upon them. That's essentially what a negative right is.
Or air.
It's protection.
By stealing your air, I am enslaving you.
Like,
yes,
dude, I don't know what to tell you. Like, it's not enslaving. Enslaving is when you control their body.
Yes, I control their body.
No, you don't control. If you take all the water in the planet away, you're not controlling their body.
I'm sorry. Okay, if I whip someone, am I controlling their body?
If you whip someone, if you whip someone, are you controlling their body?
Yeah.
An act of aggression.
Is it am I controlling?
In the most definitional way, no. But like, if you're like a slave owner, I guess technically you would be controlling their body. Yeah.
My point is, like, the manifestation of my control over their body is not that I'm literally forcing their hand to pick cotton. It's that I'm instead threatening them, or if need be, actually beating them with a whip.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so the way that my control over their body is manifesting is not by literally forcing them to give me all their money, or literally forcing them, physically forcing their bodies to move in a certain way in order to do whatever it is that I want them to do. The way that I'm doing it is that I will cut off your access to air if you do not do X, Y, and Z. So, like, it's different in kind from the I'm whipping them. Both are examples of they're not directly physically forcing your hand, but the result is to force you to do the thing that I want you to do.
Okay. Let me ask you a hypothetical to get your understanding on this. A landlord is coercing tenants by charging high rent. True or false?
I would need a lot more context than that. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so let's say we live in our modern day and era, and like, I don't know, it's like California markets shit after high inflation, and there's high rent prices.
Yeah,
but the renters have nowhere else to go except for these landlords who are charging really, really high rent. Are the landlords coercing the renters into buying their property?
I'm going to avoid California specifically because there's a bunch of fucked up laws that I don't want to have a part of this conversation.
Okay, well, it can be anything. It can be any place.
Say that it is a broad example of a landlord without a bunch of rent control nonsense, right? The answer is that the landlord either themselves did a bunch of work in order to construct the house, or paid for someone else to do a bunch of work to construct the house. And so the house component, I'm totally chill with them owning the house component. It's the land component that I contend with, right? I don't like the idea that they own the land. I think that's unjustified. But I think the ownership of the building is completely justified.
Okay, can they charge high rent though?
They can charge the rent in association with the value of the infrastructure, but I don't think that they have a moral right to the value of the land itself, just to the value of the infrastructure.
Okay, but they can.
I mean, they can.
They can charge high rent though, right?
If conceptually the value of the land itself is being paid to society, then yeah, I'm down for it.
What do you mean being paid to society? No, this is a private owner.
Yeah, so it's either so currently we have a property tax system, right? I think the property
Oh
tax
yeah,
systems
well yeah, it gets
are
taxed.
yeah. So obviously, I think property taxes are significantly worse than a land value tax, both in terms of the economic efficiency of them, uh, but also in terms of the moral defense of them. I think they're worse than a land value tax system. If there was a land value tax system, I would be much more in favor of that than what we have currently. But I prefer even above and beyond a land value tax system, which would capture a portion of the value of the land, but not all of the value of the land, for all of the value of the land to be captured. And the way that you capture all of the value of the land is by virtue of the system that I've described.
Mm-hmm. But so the point I'm raising with asking you this question is I want to see if you want to say it's coercion or if it's indirect coercion for a landlord to charge a high price.
Partially yes and partially no. My answer
What do you mean
is
partially? It can't be partially.
I'm saying, my answer is the component of which I am paying for the access to the land is unfair, and the component to which I'm paying to the infrastructure is totally valid, totally fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's try another one. A partner is coercing someone into staying in a relationship because they're really attractive.
What? That's
a
not
partner
coercion.
is coercing someone into staying in a relationship. So you've got this guy, he's really, really hot. He's a really hot guy. Is he indirectly coercing his girlfriend into staying in a relationship with him?
That's not coercion, no. He has a right to his body.
He has a right to his body.
Yeah, he has rights to his body. She does not have rights to his body. If she wants access to his body, then he should have to, or she should have to do the thing. Prostitution is a separate matter, but broadly, he has a right to his body, and she does not. So no, it's not coercive. To be hot is not coercive.
Okay, even if she feels trapped, even though she feels like it's unfair, because if she loses him, she'll lose something really, really good.
Yeah. It can be abusive. He can certainly wield the fact that he's hot abusively, but no, that it's coercion in the sense that we should construct our legal system in order to avoid it, to simply be hot.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, well, I was just curious because I think you're having this problem of indirect versus direct coercion. I don't really want to go back into it, but we fundamentally disagree on this idea that we also fundamentally disagree on ownership, so I don't even know if we can really get to coercion. Because in my definition of coercion, you would need to own something to be able to coerce people. But in your definition, there's no private ownership. There's only public beneficiaries.
There is private ownership. I own my toothbrush. I own all of the wood that is the result of me cutting down a bunch of trees. I own all of the oil that is a result of me drilling. I own all of all of this is, yes, you can own things. Of course you can own things. The only thing you can't own is the natural resources itself.
Okay. I mean, you said people can just come take it, so I don't believe you, but that's fine.
What do you mean people can come take it? What do you mean by that?
If somebody goes and they create a small house in a forest somewhere, people can just show up and be like, "Hey, this is ours now. This is part of our resources."
No, they can say the natural resources belong to society. That's very separate than your crops. That's very separate than your house. Your house is your labor. Your crops, the fact that there are useful products being grown on this land, is a product of your labor. That's very different than the land itself.
Bro, now it sounds like you're for homesteading. I'm getting confused. It sounds like you're an advocate for homesteading.
I'm support of labor belonging to the individual and natural resources belonging to society. It's very clear and coherent.
So what happens if you mix the labor with the land?
Say it again?
If you mix your labor with the land, do you then have private ownership of that land?
I've been saying the trees that you plant on your plot of land grow into wood, right? A renewable resource of wood. And so the trees, the product of your labor, belong to you. But the land, which existed before you and will exist long after you, is not, right? You were able to make the trees as a product of your access to that plot of land, your access to water, your access to the sun, all of these kinds of things that you didn't work to create, but you definitely did work to create the trees themselves, to plant them, to like irrigate them, all of that shit. You did a fuck ton of work. And so therefore, you own the trees, you just pay for the thing that you didn't do, which is make the sun. The thing that you didn't do, which is make the land or make the water. It's very coherent. I don't know how you're...
Okay. So person grows trees. People are allowed to show up and give him his trees, but also then take portions of his land away, right? Like they're like, yo, we're living here now, so we're just gonna take a few parts, but we'll make sure you have your trees, but we get some parts of your land. And they basically just like settle on his land. That's okay?
I don't understand what you're like. Describe the circumstances you're describing. Lay out in like specifically what you're saying.
Sure. So like let's just say a little old man basically goes to some area in the woods and then he cuts down the trees, he makes a little farming area, and then he starts growing like vegetables or something, okay? So he's growing vegetables, and then some people show up and they're like, hey, buddy, listen, we saw you it looks like you're making some vegetables over here, but you don't own the land you're standing on. You own those vegetables because you made them, but the land you're standing on is owned by all of us. So we want that land. We'll let you have your vegetables, but we want to live on that land with you.
Okay, what's the value of this plot of land? Absent
what do you mean? What's the value?
Absent the value of the work that he's done on the land, what's the value of the land itself, the plot?
It's a nice piece of land. He cultivated it. He cut down the trees. He made a nice little farming plot. It's a nice piece of land. I don't know what the value is specifically in dollars.
The guy in the woods, right? So like, are there other plots that are equivalently nice as his plot was prior to him working the plot?
No, it's like surrounded by woods. He made the plot himself.
Yeah, all of the other plots, the equivalent plots prior to his work, exist all around, right? Okay. Value of his plot is 0 in that environment. The value that is accrued is exclusively the result of his labor. The value of his plot, the land itself, is 0. Void his work. It's only valuable.
If he cuts down one tree, he's adding value, right?
That's what I'm saying. Yes.
Yeah.
The value of the plot is the product of his labor. Okay? So that's different than the value of I bought in the year 1900 a whole I bought like an entire acre of downtown Manhattan, and it's just been sitting empty for the last 125 years, or 24, whatever, 124 years, right? The value of that plot is valuable not by virtue of any work that I've done, but by virtue of the work that everyone else has done surrounding that plot, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't think that that is comparable to this farmer guy in the middle of the woods. If this farmer guy is in downtown Manhattan and he's like, hey, no one should be able to come onto my plot of land, no one should be able to use this, that's obviously, 1, massively unproductive, and 2, massively exploitative of the people around him who have worked no less hard than he has in cultivating that land.
And?
Okay, so the value of that plot is different. So it's not the same to go into the guy into the woods and say, hey, like, we'll pay you in association with your labor in order to get access to this plot of land, right? Which is to say, like, hey, we'll pay you whatever you want, and if we are able to get to an equal trade on this, then and you're willing to take it, Gucci, because all of the value of that plot is by virtue of the value that he has accrued, the work that he has done in order to make it a nice plot, versus the guy in downtown Manhattan who just let it, grow wild for the last 120 years. In which case, all of the value of that plot is by virtue of the work that society has done around it, and none of the value of that plot is by virtue of labor.
Okay, the Manhattan thing is cool, but like, is the man in the woods, is he allowed to exclude people from entering the area he homesteaded?
Yeah, because the value of that plot is only the result of his labor. That's different, though, than if that same plot were in downtown Manhattan. This is very easy to understand. I don't understand you're not following this.
Well, it's not easy to understand because I'll tell you what.
You can disagree, but the idea, like, I'm fine with you disagreeing, but it's frustrating when you claim not to understand a thing that I believe that you do understand.
Well, I'll tell you why. I'm confused because in one area it sounds like one man mixes his labor with the land, and he has some sort of I won't call it ownership, but he's allowed to exclude people off this land, right? Which you just said.
The point is in the radical extreme of its rural bumfuck nowhere. The value of that plot of land is exclusively because I could easily get to an equivalent plot of land that is identical to that plot of land, just prior to him having done any work on it, right? And do the identical thing that he has done, and build a plot that is the same exactly as his plot. In that environment, all of the value that has been accrued on that plot is the result of his work. Whereas this plot in downtown Manhattan, which no one has been allowed into for 120 years, and it's just a mangled, overgrown mess, all of the value of that plot in downtown Manhattan is exclusively the result of the labor that has been happening around the plot, but not inside of the plot. Or rather, it has been the product of the labor of everyone else, of society. And so the idea that society should have to pay a price to have access to that which is that has been accrued, the value that has been accrued by society, is as much unjustified in that case as it would be for this guy in rural bumfuck nowhere to have to pay to anyone in order to be able to have access to this plot of land that is whose value is accrued exclusively by him. Both are equally unjustifiable for the same reason.
Okay, bro, listen, I want to be completely fair to you because I understand you're coming at this with good intentions, but you have to understand that what I'm talking about is something completely different from what you're talking about. I'm asking, so when I'm speaking...
Start your sentence over.
Sure, so it's fine. So basically, I'm talking about like very, very low level, very immediate, easy to understand hypotheticals, yes and no questions. Whereas, what are the rights of people and what are the rights of property? What kind of laws are we going to implement? So when I ask you, if a little man goes into a woods and he chops down a bunch of trees and then he grows some vegetables and he's like, okay, this is my little area and I made this area really nice, and then people show up, I want to know in your legal system, can he exclude them or can he not exclude them? And you kind of abstracted to this example of the guy living in Manhattan or the guy who owns real estate in Manhattan, and he's basically allowing his property to accrue interest and inflate with the rest of the economy. And I forget what the name is called, but essentially it's an asset that's growing exponentially more valuable because of the labor of the entire economy of people working and raising the value of assets. I understand that, but I just want to know like the very basic direct rights that people have when it comes to property.
Yeah, so in my perfect world, prior to starting to do the work that he was doing in rural bumfuck nowhere, he would have like dropped a fraction of a penny into a hat. This is obviously, I'm like semi-kidding because obviously who the fuck you don't have to do this. But in my perfect world, he would have paid like literally a fraction of a penny in order to have access to this plot in the middle of bumfuck nowhere. And that fraction of a penny would have gone into the same pot as the much more than a fraction of a penny from this plot of land that is in the middle of Manhattan, which would also go to society. And he would be able to get the benefits of his fraction of the accrued interest on that pot, right? So he would get a bunch of money by virtue of all of the other plots that he is not exploiting. And he'd also get the money from the fact that he is exploiting this very minimally valuable plot of land that is only valuable by virtue of the work that he's done.
Sure.
But the fact that he did not actually pay his penny, like, sure, maybe he should like owe society a penny, but then like keep on keeping on, because like fuck off. Obviously, he would have paid the penny if like it was requested of him 2 years ago when he didn't pay the penny and started working on this bottleneck. But like in my perfect system.
Yeah, I understand. And okay, that's cool. So what do you think about centralized banks?
Okay, what facet of centralized banks?
Well, are you cool with them, monetarily inflating the economy?
In what sense? Are you asking about debt? Or are you asking about fiat currency that's unbacked?
Well, yeah. So in the natural state of the economy in capitalism, which obviously you don't agree with capitalism, but like in the natural state of things, with voluntary trade, what happens is you have a economy that is not debt based. But if you have centralized banks where they basically what do? They inflate the monetary system so that they turn into a credit or a debt based system where they are essentially printing lots and lots of money, and then they distribute it out to the banks, and then the banks give those incredibly powerful or large loans to probably business owners or the most powerful corporations. And so what you have is a infinitely inflating system where the people with the most amount of money are able to leverage their assets and essentially double their money at some sort of interest rate. And so that's what I mean by a debt or credit based system versus a non-debt, credit based system, which you would have in capitalism.
Okay, so first of all, I am a capitalist, to be clear. But to the question of whether or not there can be debt to these centralized banks, I'm not opposed to debt in concept, definitely. I think that certainly you can have debt to private lenders. And so the real question is what's the specific problem with it being a bank as designed as it currently is, which I'm not quite following yet.
Sure. So it depends on your values, because technically speaking, there's nothing morally wrong with the things we have currently. There are some if you want to look long-term oriented, there are a lot of problems with the system as it is now. But the biggest thing is the difference between a debt-based and a non-debt-based system is in a non-debt-based system, your money gains value over time. And in a debt-based system, your money loses value over time. That's the biggest distinction.
No. Your money in the sense of the value of the dollar decreases in value over time, but your money in the sense of the shit that you own increases in value over time, assuming you put it in something like an index fund.
Well, yeah, right? That's why I said money, not asset.
Well, I think that when you define money as the dollars of the government, that's a silly way to understand money, I think.
Well, I mean, how abstract do you want to make it? Because I mean, I think money's energy, right? But I was just using money in the dollars.
So my point is dollars. I don't care about them. I see a dollar as just a stand-in for things that I do care about, which is assets, right? And so my assets, which is to say my index fund or whatever it might be. I'm doing an index fund just because that's the simplest version of asset that I can think of. My assets are increasing in value over time. And so who gives a shit if the value of the dollar, which I don't hold anything in and just use as my momentary mechanism of exchange, is increasing or decreasing in value. I don't hold a bunch of dollars. I hold a bunch of money in index. I hold a bunch of index fund, right?
Yeah.
So who gives a shit? Why do I care?
Well, I'll tell you why.
Okay.
So the way that the economy works, and you already know this, but I'm explaining this for the audience. The way the economy works and money works is that it's not like we can just create money out of nowhere. It's like everything you do with the economy has consequences to it. So if you print money, there's going to be consequences to that. Now, the consequences of having a centralized bank that prints money or, monetarily inflates the currency, what happens is you essentially devalue the dollar and create bigger and bigger loans that can be used. And many, Keynesians would say that it's good for the economy because what happens is we're giving gigantic loans to very big businesses, and the very big businesses can then, increase their assets, expand, do R&D, research and development. They can do these types of things. to make the economy better. Now, what happens in the big term is it's actually really, really good for richest people because they can essentially double their assets because they can leverage all their assets and get, double the currency or double the value of what they currently own at a interest rate. And therefore they can use that to beat the interest rate. So like if they use the S&P 500, which is, annually around, 7 to 10%. If they can beat the interest rate, which interest rates change all the time, but they can be like 5%, 2%, whatever. Sorry, what'd you say?
This is not to do with the government. People who are good at paying back their loans are going to get loaned to. That's what you just said, right?
If you understand the system.
Yeah. If you have a
boom. That was fun. It was fun. He gonna come back. He gonna come back for sure. Once he realizes he's talking to himself, he's gonna come back. Once he realizes I don't respond, that'll be the moment he comes back for sure. It's really sad. He thinks he's a capitalist. He is, in fact, a communist, unfortunately. It's really sad. He's so close. Any day now, he'll come back. He will do it. Maybe I should hang up and call him again? For sure, he's gonna pick up. For sure. He's gonna pick up. He's gotta pick up. He's gotta pick up, bro. He's gotta pick up. Come on, Quibbles. Come on, Quibbles, my man. Hey!
I'm sorry.
What's up?
Okay. Sorry.
Fuck. Hey, we tried, boys. We really tried. Hey.
Sorry about that. My fault. I'm walking and I messed with the thing by accident. I'm sorry. What were you saying?
Bro, you've been walking for an hour and a half. That's crazy.
She's an excitable puppy, and I've underwalked her today, and it's nice out now. It's been very not nice for a couple days. Okay, so what was I saying? Oh, yeah. So even if we had a gold standard or whatever, even if there was no central bank, as a private lender, I assume you'd agree that I'd be much more likely to loan at more like quality rates to someone like Elon Musk than to someone who has a history of not paying back their debt, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so like, and that's totally defensible because like Elon has a very long history of being good at paying back his debt. So like, cool, right? And even if he doesn't pay his debt back, I'm also like protected because in the case that he doesn't pay back his debt, I get to take all of his shit, and his shit is valuable, right? So like, cool. That's true. That's not something to do with like a central government. It's not to do with central banking. That's
well,
just like
it does. Because the centralized
that would be true if we didn't have a central banking system.
Well, the centralized bank gives money to the government and they give money to private investors. Well, they don't give money directly to private investors. What they do is they lower or raise the interest rate, and that's the way that banks give money to private investors. So they indirectly make it so that private investors can make more money. But
sure,
the problem with this is that I don't know what kind of job you work in. I'm not going to ask. But if you work a low-wage job like I have done in my past and possibly still do, what you'll notice is if you don't get a raise according to the interest rate, and by the way, the interest rates can vary wildly, but the true interest rates are much, much higher than we know them to be. If you don't get a raise in your job to match the interest rate, at the very least, you won't be able to keep the amount of money you make every year. And for most people,
sorry, you're saying interest rate, you mean inflation rate?
Yeah, did I say interest rate? I meant inflation rate. That's what I meant.
Right. Yeah,
so yeah, if the inflation rate is higher than your annual raise, which I looked it up, and the average is apparently 3%, which I think is really high for low-wage workers. At least in my experience, 3% is really high. But if if we take for granted 3%, as the average, the inflation rate needs to be at least 3% for people to keep the money that they've been making year over year. Now, if it's lower than that, if it's lower than the interest rate by like 2%, 3%, they're essentially getting a demotion of 3% every single year in their low wage job. And this is bad for poor people. So it depends on what you value.
So it's bad
for poor people. It's good for good people. It's good for rich people.
Let's just be precise in what we're saying. It's bad for poor people to be paid in a substance that is a decreasing value.
Well, yeah, because we operate in dollars in the U.S. So yeah.
But the point is that you don't operate operating in dollars and having dollars isn't the same thing, right? So like your paycheck every week or 2 weeks, whatever the fuck it is, comes in the mail and says a dollar amount, but you don't keep that in dollars unless you're incredibly stupid. You immediately send that off to like go be useful capital for you.
No, bro, right? People don't do that.
Okay, because they're dumb. But like,
bro, it doesn't matter if they're dumb. They're gonna suffer because they're not economists. They're not financiers.
Okay, you don't have to be a financier to set up your money to be in an index fund, right? That's why
they have to. They need to understand how the economy works. The economy is extremely complicated. Poor people don't know how the economy works.
Index funds aren't. Put your money in an index fund. Everyone listening,
I agree with you.
Money in an index fund. Put it in an index fund, right?
Like I agree with you, but that's not how. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of this, but understanding index funds, understanding finances in the economy is a second job. It's a second full-time job.
That's fine. Yes, I agree. If you want to be an active investor, that is a second full-time job. I agree. So I'm saying index fund. I'm saying don't think about it. Just put it in the thing where money go up. Money doesn't always go up day by day, but in aggregate, over a period of years, money go up if money be an index fund. Put your money in an index fund. Don't think about it. Right?
Yes. I agree with you, but you have to be proactive to know that. No, you have to be aware.
You can just set up automatically such that all of your money goes into any form of bank account or any form of account that you want and automatically transfer it directly into an index fund. You can do that, right? You should do that. It's a good thing to do. I mean, obviously, you need some amount of money to spend day by day, but like setting aside the money that you need on a day by day basis, rest of your money, just send it directly to an index fund, right? So the fact that like you happen to be paid in dollars, like who gives a shit? If someone wants to pay me, like if someone was like, hey, I want to buy your house for $2 million, right? But I'm not going to pay you in dollars. I'm going to pay you in euros, right? But it's going to be an equivalent value of dollars, right? I'll say, Gucci, thank you, monsieur. Even if you're French, I don't give a shit that you're French because you just gave me $2 million for something that's definitely not worth $2 million. So hell yeah, right? And so I'm going to take my $2 million and I'm going to immediately get it out of euro money because I don't believe in the euro trash, right? I don't care that you paid me in value.
Fair enough.
In a version of value that I don't want it to be in, because I'll immediately transfer from the version of value that I don't like it to be in into the version of value that I do want it to be in, right? So the fact that like your actual wages are going down on an annualized basis is a problem. But the fact that like it happens to be coming in euros or happens to be coming in dollars or whatever, I don't give a fuck. Who cares? It can come in Bitcoin. As long as the actual assets can immediately be transferred into something I do want, who cares?
Yeah, but bro, that's the big point. That's the big scam. People aren't aware of the system of inflation. They've heard of it, but they don't know how it works. And even those who know about it, hold on one sec. Even those who know about it, those with the lowest jobs, even if they know about it, it's not like they can, negotiate with their corporation they're working for higher wages to match inflation. They can't do that. The corporation would never do it.
Why can't they do it?
Have you worked for a corporation?
Of course I've worked for corporations, yeah. Why can't you?
Okay, well, do you know how the corporate structure works? They don't negotiate with raises.
Yeah, so you need to make a union.
Bro, what? You can't make a union?
Like that. Yes, the way, like, I'm sorry to break it to you, but like the corporate guy, his job is to make as much money for the corporation as possible. Your job is to make as much money for you as possible. And like, generally speaking, it is in your interest for the corporation to do well and for you to do well as a result. But in the case of how much you get paid, that is a directly one-to-one antagonistic component of your relationship. And so that facet of your relationship, yeah, negotiate harder. Like, yeah, you need to like work as however you can negotiate in order to increase your pay. Like, fuck McDonald's, fuck Subway, do whatever you need to do to get money, more money, better. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
That's like,
I mean,
like
that's fine. Like, I
mean,
so
right? Do you
I
disagree
was
with
just
that?
laying out the points for why I'm against the debt-based system, because the debt-based system works against poor people. Now, listen, you can be for the
No,
debt-based
no,
system,
no,
but
no,
it's just
no,
gonna
no.
fuck poor people in the end.
If I had a set system and I was paying people in floopity boopities, and floopity boopities are a system that is, it's a cryptocurrency or whatever, right? It has nothing to do with government. But floopity boopities are designed
To go to
such
the
that the
moon.
floopity decreases in value by 3% every year in actual value. It decreases by 3% of actual value per year. And I'm paying you in floopity boopities. Like, you can say, that's fine, pay me in floopity boopities. I don't give a shit what you pay me in as long as I'm able to transfer out of floopity boopities. But you better be giving me 3% more floopity boopity every fucking year, or it's time for me to go on strike. Because I need more floopity boopities. Right?
Yeah.
But that's nothing to do with like, there's nothing wrong inherently with the floopity boopity system. The problem is that I am decreasing my actual income on an annualized basis, and that's bullshit.
Yeah, I
The
agree
floopity
with
boopity
you.
problem is the decrease in my income. Because my income is not going to stay in floopity boopities. It's going to go into an index fund. Because I'm not dumb.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough with the floopity boopities. Fair enough. Fair enough.
So it's not about government. Nothing about floopity
It
boopity.
is about government, to
It's
be
not.
clear.
Floopity boopities are no better. The floopity boopity system that I just described is no better than the government system of dollars. Dollars are floopity boopities. If you keep your money in floopity boopities or in dollars, you're a sucker. Put it in an index fund. Buy stock. Get a
I
house.
understand. I understand. But
Right?
so the point I'm making here is that I have a thesis that I believe that the powerful, and no matter what system it is, but especially in today's mixed economic system, I believe that the powerful will always do the most amount they can get away with. They will scam people for the most amount they can get away with, and no more. Sometimes they'll push the boundaries, but for the
Mm-hmm.
most part, they will try to scam people for as much as they can get away with. And
Yes.
so what they'll do is people are smart, people are innovative, so they'll create things in order to scam people. And I believe that the centralized bank system was one of the creations that rich, intelligent, smart people created to be able to scam people by reinforcing their assets by inflating away the savings of poor people who don't know how money works. And so they're able to reinforce the power of these institutions and corporations, and they use it through the inflationary monetary system. But that's just the way I see it.
That rich, smart people are taking advantage of the fact that poor, dumb people are doing dumb things with their money.
Mm-hmm. Only
Yes,
because they changed the game. Only because they changed the game.
It's not a new they changed the game shit. Like, it used to be the case that people just wouldn't get raises, right? It was like very
Yeah.
normal for people to not get raises for
Yeah.
long time. In our economy now, most people are getting raises most of the time, most years, right? Not all the time, obviously, but in aggregate, generally speaking, the dollary dues, the floopity boopities, that number go up more than the value of floopity boopity, the value of the dollar goes down for most people in most of the economy. So I
Okay.
don't give a shit about the floopity boopity because I'm not going
That's
to keep getting
fair.
floopity.
That's fair. That's the way you want the system to go. That's fair. I understand.
Like, like I understand why, like, dollar amount, the value of the dollar going down is scary conceptually, but I also see it as like beneficial in certain contexts, particularly for poor people, right? So like poor people have a lot more debt, not in aggregate than rich people, but as a proportion of their money, poor people generally have more debt than do wealthy people, unless they're in real estate. That's the one exception. But assuming you're not in real estate, rich people generally have less debt than poor people as a percentage of their value, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so then if you're doing a thing where most people's debt is debt in dollars, right? Debt in floopity boopities. If the value of the floopity boopity is going down, that's actually good for people who have debt in floopity boopities.
Correct. Yeah.
So, like, if you are a debtor, I like when inflation happens as a debtor, right? As someone who is owed debt, I don't like it at all. But it's not clear to me that, like, it is definitely bad for society that we're slightly advantaging debtors over people who are have debt owed to them.
Yeah. Well, it is because it creates bad incentives. It incentivizes you to get into debt because you have an advantage when you're in debt.
It incentivizes you to get into debt, but it doesn't actually incentivize you to get into debt, really, because the debt rate, the rate that you're paying, is such that, like, the actual, like, if you owe 5%, in terms of, like, year over year, the rate that you owe on top of the amount that you owe in terms of the debt, that's an example of you actually owing like 2% on an annualized basis. Because the real thing that's going on is that you owe 2% plus they're flubbing the numbers so that the floopity boopity problem of the floopity boopity decreasing in value by 3% every year is dealt with. Right?
Right.
So, like, you actually own 2% debt. But absent the fact that the floopity boopities decrease in value by 3% every year, you just owe 2% on your debt. And so the difference in terms of your experience as a debtor, paying 5% versus paying 2%, is not actually material, in as much as your actual real amount of money owed over the long course is the same. Right? The asset cost is the same. It's just the amount of floopity boopities is changing. But who gives a shit? Because floopity boopities aren't real.